finally U.S. Abrams are in Ukraine, why did it take too long to get there?
You got to train people to drive them first. And then it's not just a matter of climbing in, turning on the ignition and driving away. You also have to learn how to use these in a combat formation as a unit. So I think it was a combination. They also didn't want to send the best of the Abrams. They get sort of second, third hand. It's like being the youngest kid in a family of 4 or 5 boys. You always get the hand-me-down jeans and shirts from your brothers. That's sort of what's happening to Ukraine.
How did it happen? They were building new tanks?
Yeah, no, that's the problem with the United States. It's really not building new tanks. They had to set up a factory that reconditions existing tanks. But to my knowledge, they do not have one single dedicated plant today that's churning out new tanks. They're still trying to come up with a new design that they can agree on. The one that'll cost even more money, maybe even be heavier and less useful on a battlefield.
Pentagon Press Secretary Sabrina Singh, she says that the Ukrainians are learning English before the process of training. How long does it take, in your opinion?
To learn English to be able to fly an airplane, I think they're looking at easily 3 months. And that's just to fly the F-16. But yeah, again, these are I call them meaningless gestures. These are not going to change the situation in Ukraine with respect to Russia. Ukraine is not magically going to produce a 1 million-man army that's trained and well-equipped, and with pilots who magically can suddenly fly airplanes that they've never flown before, and that the Russian air defenses will cease to exist, and that these Ukrainian planes will fly unfettered to the front lines and take out Russian. I mean, it's not going to happen. It's crazy talk, not on your part, but these people that keep insist that, oh yeah, they still have a chance.
Julian Ropke, Jihadi Julian, he's writing for Bild newspaper in Germany. He's talking about the manpower is the biggest problem for Ukrainians. And he mentions the manpower of Russians, how Russians strategically, tactically, they're getting better and better in the battlefield. And he comes to a conclusion that still Ukrainian can win this war.
Did you ever see the movie Dumb and Dumber with Jeff Daniels and Jim Carrey? And you remember the one point where Jim Carrey's trying to form a romantic relationship with this woman that hates him, and he says, "Is there any chance that we can go out together?" And she goes, "No." And he goes, "So I still have a chance." Yeah, Ukraine has as much chance of winning and beating the Russians as Jim Carrey does of getting a date with that woman in character. Not going to happen. So, what's really telling is that Ropke has been one of the biggest cheerleaders up to now for Ukraine. Ukraine could do no wrong. Russia could do nothing right. And the fact that he's conceding that, we've got a manpower problem here in Ukraine. They've run out of men. Remember, we're talking, the year's gone by quick. We're, on the eve of going into October. But 7 months ago, 8 months ago, it was a completely different picture. You had 12 brigades that Ukraine was training, that 9 of them trained by NATO. And you do the math, a brigade is roughly 4,000 to 5,000 troops. So 12 brigades, let's say you got 5, you did the maximum was 60,000 men. More likely they were doing 4,000, maybe 3,000. So somewhere between 30 and 60,000 men. They've been killed, wounded, destroyed. They're combat ineffective. Those troops that were trained, they don't exist anymore. They're gone. used up in battle. So where is Ukraine going to get a new set? And, this people just don't understand the time that's involved in training, learning to, you want things to become second nature where they're not having to think about it. So that's part of training, to inculcate habits and practices that can be easily and quickly repeated under stress without having to think about it or look up instructions in a book. Ukraine has been grabbing people off the street, putting a uniform on them, maybe teaching them how to shoot a rifle with just cursory instruction, and then throwing them at the front, not being trained in military discipline, military mindset, how to move as a unit. So it just, that's the key. Without soldiers, you don't have a war. You can have all the great equipment stacked up, but what does it mean if there's nobody to operate the tank or fire the artillery piece?
He's talking about this sending more weapons to Ukraine. It's going to be a win-win for Ukrainians and for the military-industrial complex. In case of military-industrial complex, we can understand they're going to send these old weapons to Ukraine. They have to reproduce these weapons. How can we translate this winning for Ukrainian? What does it mean?
Well, that's the key question. What would it mean for Ukraine to win? Well, number one, it means that Russia would be expelled from Ukrainian territory. That Russia would be forced to give up the territories that it has annexed, that are now considered part of Russia: Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, Zaporizhia, and Crimea. Well, that's not going to happen. It is not going to happen. And so people need to stop kidding themselves. But the amount of lying that's going on by a whole variety of military pundits, this Sean Davis in the United Kingdom, he's on Sky News, and David Petraeus, who has said a lot of stupid things in his time, really came out and just, claimed that Ukraine right now is winning. Oh boy, they're marching to victory. It leaves you speechless to see that kind of stupidity and dishonesty, because it's a flat out lie. So, but they feel the need to lie about what's going on. It's really shocking.
General Mike Milley was talking about this war going to continue for years. On the other hand, we have Shoigu. He mentioned that this war going to end in 2025. How do you see these two strategies on the part of the U.S. and the part of Russia?
Well, only one of them can be right. And the reality is Milley and Biden have a track record of making bold predictions that turn out to be completely wrong. Remember Afghanistan? We're looking at a long war there. They're gonna hang in there for a long while. They're the biggest army. They didn't last a week. So it's a matter of time right now. It looks like the funding for Ukraine is going to be cut or reduced. The request reduced from what Biden wanted. And going forward, I don't see other countries starting to line up, say, oh, let's see how much money we can give Ukraine. I think they recognize it's becoming a losing effort. And what's really important for people to focus on is the shift in rhetoric by Russian officials. So it's clear they've had a meeting. There's a new talking point, if you will, a new area of concord among the military and the foreign ministry and the legislature. And it is this: they now state Ukraine will either capitulate or it will cease to exist as a country. No gray area. There's not going to be a transgender Ukraine, okay? It's either going to surrender on Russian terms or they're going to eliminate it. I think Russia is deadly serious about that. If you discount and disbelieve what Russia's saying, then you will be in for a rude awakening.
It seems that the disagreement between the Biden administration and Congress is so serious. They ask for $24 billion and the Congress is talking about just $6 billion.
Oh, they'll split it in the middle somewhere. You know, they'll ultimately reach an agreement. They'll continue to fund it until it's lost. You know, that's just the United States is not backing away as it should. But so it will continue to pour money into the rat hole. Right now in the United States, we're going through this whole issue of, is the government going to run out of money? Well, so the government will shut down, and then they will work over the weekend. They'll come up with a deal, and come Monday morning, government will be open again. Well, guess what? It's a weekend. Government usually closes for Saturday and Sunday anyway, so they're shutting down the government, and it's not like it's a flow of water that you can turn a spigot and then it will shut off the flow of water in terms of aid going to Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine has had difficulty absorbing what it has received, and you've got a variety of different. You got Challengers, Leopards, now M1 Abrams. All tanks are not made the same. Just because they look the same and they fire a large projectile, the inner workings of these tanks are all different and requires different training.
Do we have any information about the drones that Ukrainians are using in this war? Where do they come from and how efficiently Ukrainians are using these drones?
Well, they've not been very efficient with them. They're not using them at all on the scale that the Russians are. I don't know who's producing them. I imagine it's either somebody in Europe or somebody in the United States or some combination. But the drones have not been that effective. The attacks that have taken place in Moscow were just pinpricks. It didn't kill anybody. Even the missiles that Ukraine has tried to throw at Russian targets, particularly in Sevastopol, they've been pretty ineffective there too. They're expensive. They fired 6 missiles, 1 got through, and now you haven't had any other significant firing of those missiles over the last 2 weeks. So I think Ukraine's at a disadvantage with respect to the drones, and Russia. I don't think Russia realized at the start of the war how important the drone warfare would become, but I think they've now discovered that it is, you can do things with drones that you used to have to do with pilots. In terms of a pilot would have to go in with close air support to bomb a tank. Now you use drones, and one to spot and one to deliver. So this is a game changer in terms of warfare.
Do we have any understanding on what would be that point, that special important point that the politicians, the elites in the United States say, this is the final point for Ukraine. This is the end of this war. Let's go for negotiation.
It will end like World War II ended, with Ukraine either capitulating or being destroyed. I think the Russians are exactly correct. By the time American leaders come to the point of saying, oh boy, we need to try to negotiate an end to this, it's too late. The Russians will not negotiate. You do not trust the West. The West has already proven that it's a liar, that they used the Minsk agreement and Minsk II simply as a way to a diversion and a way to buy time. And so, Russia, the old saying, fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice. Then it's really, or fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. So if you let yourself get taken the second time, you're the fool. And Russia's saying, no, we're no fools. We're not going to play that. So it remains to be seen. The West does not have limitless supplies of tanks, aircraft, armored vehicles, ammunition, particular artillery shells. They don't. They're limited. And they can only send so much without depleting. And they're still building pressure to try to confront China. So, and then within the United States itself, I mean, the United States is a mess internally. We're about as divided as the Slovak Republic is. If you look at the election they're having in Slovakia, the majority, the guy with the largest number of prospective votes is coming in at around 22% popularity. So that is no way has the endorsement of most of the population. You're seeing this developing chasm here in the United States that I think is really unbridgeable. And on top of it, when you look at just the major cities, New York, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, Portland, they're just filled with homeless camps, people living in tents, Washington, D.C., and using drugs and, defecating in public. I mean, it's just, it's the kind of stuff, I saw stuff like that in Honduras back in 1978 when I lived in the Campo, when you're out in the middle of nowhere and with the chickens and the pigs. But, America's, not some third world hellhole, or it wasn't, but it sure looks like it these days. So you got this real disconnect between what's going on the foreign policy front, where the United States is sending billions of dollars overseas, more than $1 trillion really over the last 20 years, and ignoring the needs at home with, rising crime, rising deaths from drug usage, drug overdose, failure to do elections, and on top of that, or a failure to teach people to read. In Baltimore recently, they came out with a study. 40% of the high schools, they did a state test on math. Zero of the students passed the test. Zero. And then you got all of the illegal migrants flooding the border, trying to get into the United States. I mean, it's just, it's a witch's brew of chaos on the Western side. And we're pretending that the main battle's with Russia, and failing to accept that Russia's got this thing won. It's won it. It's just a matter of time. It's, the expression dead man walking, or in this case, Ukraine's like that chicken. You cut its head off, the chicken still runs around for a while, but it has no head. And then it falls over and dies.
How important is this war in Ukraine for the US election for 2024 for Democratic Party? Is that an important issue, or the voter do not care about Ukraine?
They don't care. The only way they would care is if the United States got into a war and then was stacking body bags of U.S. military personnel at Dover Air Force Base. Then they'd really care. But it is unlikely. You do not see the public clamoring for let's go get involved in the war in Ukraine. Let's put in more soldiers. Let's see if we can have our aircraft fly over there and get blown out of the sky. That's not happening, and I think that's only going to become more pronounced as you get closer to the election. There is no reason for the United States to be involved in Ukraine, particularly now that we know that it's got a large contingent of Nazi supporters, enthusiasts, however you want to describe them. And, for years they've tried to deny it, or for more than a year, the supporters of Ukraine have insisted that that's a lie. Well, when you got one of the Ukrainian supporters who was a member of the SS Galicia division, sorry, that's a Nazi.
Somebody who was fighting Russians during World War II, they're trying to justify their decision for inviting this guy into the parliament.
Yeah, you would think the one country that should have been apologized or had received an apology was Russia, because they were accused of being something that they're not. They're not a communist state. When this guy, when Yaroslav, I think is his first name, when he was fighting with the Waffen SS division, they could at least at that time argue that the Soviet Union were communists, but he was fighting with the Nazis. And he was it wasn't that he was recruited and conscripted. No. He voluntarily joined, and in voluntarily joining, had to swear an oath to be a part of it. So it's just, I mean, it is. This is not new. If you go back 25 years ago, CBS 60 Minutes did a show on the number of Nazis hiding out in Canada. And they were, the Simon Wiesenthal Center was, had been investigating and coming and identifying these people. So Canada has had a long history of embracing Nazis and welcoming them. They did it in the name of opposing communism. So they hated communism. They loved Nazis. Simplest way to put it.
In German media, in the UK media, they were talking about these brigades that Ukrainians are dividing in tiny groups, that Ukrainians are not following the tactics of NATO. And they were criticizing Ukrainian for doing that. Now, Insider published an article says that Ukrainians were right to abandon Western tactics. It seems that they don't know what would be the best strategy
No, they don't.
in this war.
It's not complicated. You've got to have air power. So Ukraine, to have a fighting chance of really breaking through Russian defensive lines, they would need to have air superiority. That means they could fly their fixed wing aircraft over the defensive lines, drop large bombs, and engage tanks and artillery pieces, number one. Number two, that they would have massive artillery advantage so that they could shell Russian positions as troops would then move forward. Three, that they would have mobile air defense that could counter anything that Russia would put forward, both in terms of combat aircraft, helicopters, and missiles, air-to-surface missiles or surface-to-surface missiles. They had all that. Then there's a chance that they could have broken through and defeated Russia. But they don't have that. They don't have it. And just to continue to pretend that they do means you need a psychiatrist because you're delusional. You belong in a nut house. That's the situation we're at right now.
The latest interview of Hillary Clinton, she was talking about that Putin hates democracy. He intervened in 2016 and he's going to intervene in 2024. What's the point here?
Because, she can't look at herself in the mirror. It scare her too much, having to see who she is for what she is. A corrupt grifter, someone who's used her political position to amass wealth and to influence peddle around the world. Without the accusations against Putin, it's the diversion. I call it the Hollywood strategy. If you're going to go pitch a story in Hollywood, they always ask, well, who's the villain? Who's the bad guy? Because you got to have a bad guy in order to have the drama. So that's Putin's role. Putin becomes the enemy du jour, the evil force in the world until such time we decide, no, it's got to be Xi Jinping. He'll become the bad guy. It's just, America has the attention span of a 3-year-old child on this stuff. And it's just, for Hillary to say it, it's outrageous. But, we shouldn't be surprised that she gets outraged over fantasies that she makes up.
Did you see the second GOP debate?
I couldn't. I asked to be waterboarded instead. So no, no, they're not resonating. None of them have support between Mike Pence, Chris Christie, then Ron DeSantis, sort of self-immolated. I mean, I like DeSantis. I live in Florida. I've liked him as a governor. But what he did, what I read about what he did at the debate, particularly blaming Trump, and these guys are idiots. They all want to say that they're going to stand up to the deep state. Okay, well and good. And yet they don't say a word about the deep state attacks on Donald Trump. They let it pass. Only I think Vivek Ramaswamy was the only one to offer any kind of defense of Trump. And they're irrelevant. They are as irrelevant to the Republican Party as John Kasich. Kasich, used to think that he had a chance, that he was going to be a rising star, but people just finally found him too oily, too untrustworthy, and people like Mike Pence have shown their true colors, to betray Donald Trump. I'm not arguing that Trump is a perfect guy. He made lots of mistakes, particularly selection of personnel. But his message, what people keep missing, is his message about America first, and that populist aspect resonates across races. And it's particularly appealing to the large portion of the poor and the middle class and lower middle class in the United States, because we have such a disparity in wealth. The very wealthy hate him, even though he's part of the very wealthy, because he's not willing to let them play the game where the largest, when you look at the 15 largest recipients of government grants and government money are defense contractors in the pharmaceutical industry. So, and then when you add in big agriculture, you've got, the government paying people not to farm, and or paying people with these, the wealth that gets consolidated in one or two sectors. And what used to be a vibrant middle class in the United States it's eroding. Kids coming out of high school today they don't have some factory jobs, good factory jobs that they could go to where they're building something that's lasting. Now they get to go be a manager of McDonald's or Burger King or Wendy's.
Do you think that they're going to replace Joe Biden with Gavin Newsom at the convention?
I don't think. I know Newsom thinks he'd make a great president. Just as he's been one of the worst governors ever in California. People are leaving the state because of him and his policies. But he wants it badly. No sign that Biden's going to let go, even in his dementia. The question that really is out there is, how long can they keep that dementia under control before he loses it or he dies? Just like Senator Feinstein died overnight, 90 years old. She was at work yesterday and then boom, gone. So, one of these days we wake up without Joe Biden alive. And then, there's on to Kamala Harris, who will be an even bigger disaster than Biden. And that means you then have a fist fight in the Democrat Party because there's no one that they want to rally around. Robert F. Kennedy represents a pretty viable alternative, at least for Democrats. There are a group of Democrat and Republicans who've gotten together under the title "No Labels," and you don't want to be labeled a Democrat or a Republican. I think they want to call themselves independent moderates. I pointed out, well, that's a label too. Okay, an independent moderate is a label. They're sort of thinking, they're doing a lot of polling and think that if they can just come up with the right, Frankenstein candidate, piece somebody together that they can put them out there, and that all of a sudden that's going to resonate. And I think all these, they're ignoring the Trump phenomena. Trump is getting more popular with each passing day, not less popular. And, he's shown that he's learned some things from his past mistakes. So we'll see. It's just America is in a very, very chaotic place right now. That's the thing people need to understand.
It seems that the only candidate can stand against Donald Trump would be RFK Jr. But it doesn't seem that the Democratic Party gonna let him in.
Yeah, they both have a strong populist message. And Trump has actually been complimentary somewhat of RFK Jr., but or RFK the third, I guess it is. But it's, you know, the situation politically in the United States is going to become more chaotic, not more organized. Trump is the clear front runner, but the Republican establishment hates him. And the Republican establishment is hoping to raise money, but that means if they're going to raise money, they're going to have to embrace Trump. And you got a lot of people like Mitt Romney who refuse to do that. Even though Romney in the past, when Trump was on the outside, boy, Romney was up there in a minute begging Trump to give him some money. People get they're tired of the hypocrisy, and it's rampant.